The Demogorgon, that faceless, petal-headed nightmare, is terrifying, sure. But its true power wasn't tearing through walls in Hawkins, Indiana. Its true power was tearing through the federal budget. What if I told you that the terrifying creature from the Upside Down was actually the most effective tool the U.S. government ever invented to secure billions in secret funding? Forget the Dungeons & Dragons sourcebook for a minute. We are diving into the deliberate weaponization of mythology and folklore to generate a specific kind of public and congressional panic. Because when people are gripped by what we can call fear mythology, they stop asking rational questions about where their tax dollars are going and start demanding protection from the shadows. This is the Cold War playbook. During the height of geopolitical tension, how do you justify secret defense programs that cost hundreds of millions? Programs designed to study psychic manipulation, remote viewing, and radical energy sources. You don't ask Congress for money to study telepathy. You ask for money to fight the invisible monsters, the unseen threats, the potential breaches in reality itself. You see, the Demogorgon, in its DNA, is not just a fantasy creature. It is the perfect psychological weapon. It's the modern incarnation of every ancient boogeyman, meticulously crafted to ensure continued massive secret funding. When the public is convinced that the threat is not a foreign army, but an entity that defies science, the door is wide open for unlimited resources. But here is the twist. While the government was successfully using this manufactured fear mythology to ensure financiamento secreto, they were simultaneously dredging up real-world ancient lore that described creatures suspiciously similar to the Demogorgon. We are talking about Mesopotamian demons, ancient Slavic forest spirits, and even a specific 19th century American cryptid that looks exactly like a prototype Demogorgon. The question isn't whether the monster is real. The question is, did the government know the monster was real, or did they just need us to believe it was real? You've seen the show, but now look at the budget. If you were surprised by how deeply the fear of monsters influenced real-world government spending, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, do you think the US government is still using invisible monsters to justify their budget today? Comment your theory here underneath. You think the Demogorgon is just a cool, terrifying creature from a board game, right? A perfect villain for a group of kids rolling D20s in a basement. Well, pull up a chair, because the name Demogorgon has been terrifying philosophers, poets, and entire civilizations for thousands of years. And the fact that this specific monster became the symbol of Cold War dread is not an accident. It's a terrifying look into how fear itself is engineered. We have to go way back, long before the 1980s, to understand the true power of this creature. The name Demogorgon is one of the darkest, most ancient secrets in Western mythology. It wasn't just a demon, it was the ultimate mystery. For centuries, scholars refused to even write the word down. They called it the primal terror, the unnameable God. Think of it. It was considered so powerful, so chaotic, that merely speaking its name could summon disorder and cosmic destruction. It represented the void, the raw chaos that existed before creation itself. Now fast forward to 1974. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson are writing the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons. They need a final boss, a prince of demons, something truly horrifying. They tap into this ancient fear and choose the ultimate embodiment of primal, unnameable chaos, the Demogorgon. But here is where the Cold War physics comes into play. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union and the United States weren't just worried about missiles. They were worried about the invisible enemy. They were obsessed with the idea of a catastrophic surprise attack, a biological agent, a psychic weapon, or a technology so advanced it felt like magic. The Demogorgon, this creature that hunts silently, appears without warning and comes from a literal other dimension, the Upside Down, is the perfect metaphor for 1980s geopolitical anxiety. Think about it. The Demogorgon is not a soldier you can see crossing a border. It's a breach. It's an unknown variable that can bypass all your existing defenses. That's exactly how the United States government and its Soviet counterpart needed to portray the enemy to their own people. If the enemy is just another country, you build tanks and planes. But if the enemy is an interdimensional, invisible monster, you need something much bigger. You need high-energy physics labs like Hawkins. You need psychic research programs. You need to fund bizarre, deeply compartmentalized experiments that would otherwise sound like pure science fiction. The Demogorgon, in this light, is the ultimate justification budget. Imagine you are a general in the Pentagon, trying to secure billions of dollars for a top-secret project involving sensory deprivation and attempts to communicate across vast distances. If you say, "We need to find the commies," you get a few bucks. But if you say, "There is a tear in the fabric of reality, and we must defend against the unknowable monster that lives in the chaos," suddenly, the budget is unlimited. The Duffer Brothers didn't just pick a cool monster for their show, they chose the creature that perfectly embodies the psychological terror of the era, the fear that the threat isn't outside your walls, but that the walls themselves are failing, ripped open by forces you cannot comprehend. And there's one more detail about the Demogorgon that you won't believe. In the show, the creature is often depicted as being attracted to blood, but more importantly, it hunts using purely psychic and olfactory senses. It doesn't rely on sight the way we do. This is a direct echo of the US government's real-life obsession with extrasensory perception, or ESP, during the Cold War. Projects like Stargate and MK-ULTRA weren't just about mind control. They were about finding a way to detect the enemy through means that conventional radar couldn't touch. If the Soviets developed psychic spies, how would we even know? The answer, according to some very highly funded documents, was to develop our own psychic detection. The Demogorgon, stalking through the woods, sensing its prey through a veil of reality, is the perfect visual representation of the Soviet psychic agent that the US military genuinely feared was coming for them. It's truly incredible how ancient mythology and Cold War paranoia merged to create this terrifying icon. If you're blown away by how deep the history of this monster goes, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We dive into the hidden truths behind pop culture every single week. But let's talk about that upside down for a second. If the Demogorgon is the monster of chaos, what does the upside down represent? It's not just a spooky parallel world. It's the ultimate vision of nuclear fallout. Think of the visual cues, the perpetual ash, the decay, the air being toxic, the familiar structures like Mike's house, being recognizable yet utterly ruined and abandoned. The upside down is what every American kid feared was waiting for them after the 4-minute warning. It is the world stripped bare by sudden, irreversible destruction. And the monster that dominates that landscape, the creature whose very name means unnameable chaos, it was the perfect monster to sell the idea that we needed to build bigger, more secret and more dangerous weapons programs, just in case the chaos decided to open a door in our backyard. The Demogorgon wasn't born in a lab. It was born in the deepest, darkest corner of Cold War fear. Forget the upside down for just a moment. That shrieking, petal-headed nightmare, the Demogorgon, is far older than the 1980s, and it is exponentially more terrifying than a dice roll. It's not just a monster from a tabletop game. It is a perfect synthesis of humanity's deepest, most primal dread. And here's the unbelievable truth. The anxiety that created the Demogorgon is the same anxiety that the US government weaponized to fund its most secret, most complex defense programs during the Cold War. We have to start with the name itself. When you hear Demogorgon, you immediately think Greek mythology, right? Well, sort of. The name is actually a pseudo-Greek creation, an accidental typo or misreading by a 4th century scholar trying to translate classical texts. But this mistake, this linguistic phantom, gained immense power. In medieval tradition, the Demogorgon was often described as a primordial deity of chaos and the underworld, so powerful, so fundamentally terrible, that simply speaking its name was believed to invite disaster. It was the monster you couldn't even whisper about. Now hold that thought. The unnameable, untouchable chaos monster. Fast forward 1,000 years to the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a terrifying stalemate. Both sides are pouring unimaginable sums into defense. But how do you justify spending billions on black-budget projects that the public, and sometimes even Congress, can't know about? You create a monster, not a physical one but a conceptual one. You create the invisible threat. The Demogorgon, in its Stranger Things incarnation, perfectly visualizes this Cold War fear. Think about its anatomy. It's humanoid, suggesting proximity and familiarity, but when it opens its head, it reveals a terrifying, flower-like maw of teeth. It's the ultimate uncanny valley predator. It represents the fear that the enemy is among us, hidden in plain sight, looking almost like us until it's too late. During the 1950s and 60s, the military-industrial complex wasn't just worried about missiles. They were obsessed with asymmetrical warfare, psychic spies, and mind control. Projects like MK-ULTRA, which we discussed in another episode, but the context here is crucial, were born out of the belief that the enemy might possess powers we couldn't even detect. They feared the unseen gate had already been opened. This is where the Demogorgon becomes a perfect historical metaphor. You couldn't build a massive defense program to stop a missile you could track. You built it to stop the psychic Russian spy, the interdimensional intruder, or the unknown contagion, the things that defied conventional science. Imagine you are a general trying to get funding for a lab researching transdimensional energy signatures. Congress laughs you out of the room, but if you tell them, "We need this lab, because if the Soviets open a gateway to chaos itself, they will unleash a creature that can kill our children without detection," suddenly that checkbook opens right up. The Demogorgon is the visual manifestation of the threat justification. It's the boogeyman that makes the incomprehensible spending seem absolutely necessary. And there is a fascinating little detail about the original Dungeons & Dragons lore that ties this whole historical package together. In the early D&D manuals, the Demogorgon wasn't just a single monster. It was known as the Prince of Demons, possessing two separate heads, Amul and Hethredia. These two heads constantly argued, fought each other, and pursued different goals, yet they were bound to the same monstrous body. Does that sound familiar? It is the perfect, chilling metaphor for the Cold War itself. Two massive, powerful entities, the US and the USSR, bound to the same planet, incapable of true cooperation, constantly warring internally and externally, threatening to tear the whole structure apart. The Demogorgon, the creature of internal primordial chaos, wasn't just inspired by mythology, it was inspired by the dualistic paranoia of the 20th century. It reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones that come through a rift. They are the ones we create in the darkness of our own fear. If you are as fascinated as I am by how fiction bleeds into history and how history bleeds into our deepest anxieties, you need to hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments, which real-world secret program do you think was most inspired by the fear of the unknown? But the story of the Demogorgon doesn't end with geopolitics, because the real breakthrough in understanding this monster comes when we look at the neurological pathways of fear itself and how the brain reacts when it sees something fundamentally wrong with the human shape, something that should not exist. Forget the dice roll, the creature stalking 11 and the kids, the one with the petal face and the appetite for reality. It is far older than Dungeons and Dragons. It's older than the Cold War. It is the ultimate boogeyman, meticulously engineered not in a secret lab, but in the minds of terrified people trying to justify spending billions on unseen enemies. We all know the official story. The Duffer Brothers pulled the Demogorgon from the player's handbook, the Prince of Demons, a two-headed monstrosity symbolizing chaos and destruction. But why that name? Why did the creators of D&D, E. Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, reach for such a specific obscure reference? Because the name Demogorgon itself is a weapon. Trace the etymology, and you hit a brick wall of abstraction. The word appears frequently in post-classical mythology and Renaissance poetry, but always referring to an entity so primordial, so fundamentally chaotic, that it was considered too dangerous to utter its true name. It was the unnameable source of all darkness, existing before creation itself. Think of it as the original existential dread. Now fast forward to the 1980s. You have a US government needing to constantly escalate military spending to counter the Soviet Union. You have the public demanding accountability. How do you justify pouring money into projects like psychic warfare research, interdimensional tracking, or massive complex defense systems like Star Wars? You can't just say, "We're scared of the Russians, that's a known threat." People can quantify that. You need something unquantifiable. You need the Demogorgon. The actual physical monster is secondary. What matters is the concept it represents, the invisible threat. In the Cold War era, the Demogorgon became the perfect metaphor for everything the public couldn't see, couldn't understand, and therefore couldn't fight. Silent nuclear proliferation, invisible espionage, and the terrifying idea that an enemy could breach our reality from a place we didn't even know existed. The Demogorgon is the psychological manifestation of the unknown unknown. Imagine you are a defense contractor. You are selling a $200 million radar system. You can't tell Congress it's designed to track a slow-moving Soviet bomber. You tell them it's designed to track anything, a breach, a sudden chaotic emergence from the abyss. You sell them the fear of the primordial, unnameable threat. This isn't just about money, though, it's about control. If you are constantly afraid that something chaotic, relentless and non-negotiable, a monster that simply is lurking just outside the light, you are much less likely to question the massive, oppressive concrete architecture of the Hawkins lab, or the men in suits who claim they are the only ones capable of keeping the darkness out. This is the brilliant, insidious plot twist of the Demogorgon's true origin. It was never about the creature itself, but the psychological utility of that creature. The monster didn't necessitate the secret research. The secret research necessitated the monster. It's almost like the Duffer Brothers, whether intentionally or not, nailed the precise mechanism of Cold War psychological operations. They showed us a government that wasn't just fighting the Soviets. They were using the public's fear of the Demogorgon, the ancient unnameable chaos, to build their own private empires of secrecy. But here's the bonus fact that changes everything. The Demogorgon, in its ancient mythological context, was often associated with the concept of fate, an uncontrollable destiny that governs all things. When the creature rips through the dimensional fabric in Stranger Things, it's not just opening a gate, it's ripping apart the illusion of control that the US government desperately tried to maintain. The Upside Down is not just another dimension, it is the physical space of collective Cold War anxiety, and the Demogorgon is the price paid for weaponizing fear. If you were surprised by how deeply this fictional monster is rooted in real-world military strategy and ancient dread, make sure you hit that like button right now, and tell me in the comments, which modern fear do you think is currently being weaponized to create the next great boogeyman? That's all the time we have for today. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones you can't see, because they're the ones you were told to invent.